I have to show you something a little bit stupid that I did. Here on my wall, I have two different certificates, the CPTS and the OSCP Plus. Now, you might wonder why that is such a bad thing. You see, it's pretty common in cybersecurity to have multiple certificates. The difference is that in this case, the CPTS and the OSCP supposedly covers the exact same content, just at two very different prices. While the OSCP, the most famous certificate, at least according to a lot of people, and also a lot of time, the entry credentials for any penetration tester role will run you around $2,800, $3,000. The CPTS is closer to $350. There's a pretty big price difference. So I decided to essentially spend hundreds upon hundreds of my own hours, and instead of just taking one of them, I doubled that and just took both. To answer the question, does price really matter when it comes to these types of certifications? Now, both courses will essentially teach you the same thing. They're trying to make you into a kind of enterprise network penetration tester, so you can be dropped into a client engagement and do pretty well. That means that you will be taught a wide range of skills, starting with something like web exploitation, so SQL injection and file upload vulnerabilities, IDORs, those kind of things. Moving on to something like exploiting known vulnerabilities using Metasploit or ExploitDB to use already existing vulnerabilities to usually at least gain access to a server, or maybe privilege escalate inside some form of application that you have access to. Then when you're inside a network, they will be teaching you how to attack the most common protocols, right? IMAP, POP3, right? Stuff like that for mail. File transferring protocols like FTP and SMB, and remote access protocols like SSH and RDP, and of course WinRM. Using these techniques, you will be learning how to usually again move on to a target or compromise sensitive information, which allows you to move on to targets. That meaning servers, workstation, that kind of stuff. Once you're on those targets, no matter if it's a Windows host or a Linux host, they will teach you how to escalate your privileges, becoming root or NT system or administrator on Windows, and then once you are there, pillaging those systems for more sensitive information, usually stuff like credentials, which you can then use to keep moving, laterally in that network. The goal is always to teach you how to kind of be flexible in these engagements and move towards becoming that domain administrator, or sometimes even the enterprise administrator, so you can compromise the entire domain, and in certain modules even move on to other domains in that forest. So what they are trying to teach you is pretty much the same thing, but how they teach you is actually quite different. When it comes to something like the CPTS, you are going in to hack the box. And how hack the box work is that they have separate modules which you have to complete. For the CPTS, it is 28 modules in total, and you have to complete all 28 before you're allowed to take the exam. They estimate that this is going to take you around 42 days to complete all 28 modules. And each module is a standalone thing. So when you do something like shells and payload, or using the Metasploit framework, pivoting, or any of these other types of modules, they are completely standalone. They don't build on each other in any way, sense, or form, because that's how that platform is built up. The CPTS, or in general Academy, or the Hack the Box Academy, is built with several modules in mind that you can buy one and one and one, and then their certifications are just a bunch of these modules string together. You complete all those, go do the exam, and then you get your certification. That's quite different from something like the OSCP. The OSCP and the rest of the certifications from Offsec are built from the ground up as different ways of certification. So they are a full course from start to finish, everything is linked together, it's building on each other, and that makes the enjoyment, or at least the quality of going through the course material much better. Of course, it's much more expensive. The Pen 200 again is getting closer to 10 times as expensive as the CPTS, but you are getting something from that. As you can see, there's different learning modules, and they all build on each other one after another. Additionally, there is also video content, so if you are a person who learn better for watching videos, you can actually go and watch those videos instead of just, reading all the modules. Now, there's also challenge labs after this, which you can do, which gives you a really, really good kind of indicator of how you're doing according to the exam, and where you can actually put a lot of these, techniques into play. And as you can see, there's 11 different lab networks that you can run, and they are all really, really great. Now, that means, for me at least, that the learning, quality from doing something like my OSCP was much higher than doing something like the CPTS, which makes sense. When you build something as a, full package, of course it kind of plays well together and comes out better at the end. And when you have as much money as you can charge for something like a Pen 200, you will also be allowed to, run stuff like having all these extra labs at the side. However, because the CPTS is, standalone modules, what I at least felt was I was learning more from my CPTS. There was more content, because again, when you are doing password attacks on your OSCP, well, what you're doing is that it's usually a part of a module, and you're being taught like, okay, in these cases, you might want to brute force some passwords, and then they're done, right? They will teach you a little bit, and then they're done. On the CPTS, you bought a password attacking or like a brute forcing module, so that entire thing has to stand alone on its own legs, because they don't know if you're doing your CPTS or you just wanted to learn everything there is about brute forcing and doing password attacks. But what I think is really important is also just to highlight that when it comes to something like the OSCP, that is the standard in the industry. While the CPTS is much more newer and probably won't be a standard in the industry, among other things, because the exams aren't proctored in any way, and that kind of makes it really hard to trust the outcome of the exam. The great thing about the CPTS is that price. The entry level is crazily cheap, and if you're a student, I think you can even buy access to all the course material for like $7 a month. So this is probably the best way to get, all the skills needed to get an entry-level position as a pen tester. Because the price of the OSCP quickly becomes unaffordable for people that aren't already in the industry and can get it sponsored by their employer. So while the OSCP is that, de facto standard, which you will see a lot of time, I think for a lot of people, the CPTS might be more attractive, primarily because you can get it for much cheaper, and you will be learning essentially more content, which you can then bring into that interview. Now, there are some really good ways to look at the exams, and I think that it also kind of shows what you will get no matter which one you choose. The CPTS is a 10-day exam. It is supposedly supposed to be something like a simulated or as close to a real-life penetration test as you can get during an exam environment. So you get 10 days to do a pen test and write that report. Now, you're allowed to do anything during the CPTS exam. You can use AI, you can use any tool, you can run Metasploit, whatever you want. Because of that, they are drilling you with a lot more challenge than something like an OSCP. It's actually a really, really hard exam, and much harder, in my opinion, than something like an OSCP. Because the OSCP is just 24 hours to do the labs, and then you get 24 hours after that to write and submit a report. Of course, in 24 hours, they can't expect you to do all the crazy stuff, and because of that, they have also limited the tools that you can use. And this, in my opinion, is really kind of the difference. I think that the OSCP is much more kind of corporate and structured. There's proctoring, it's 24 hours, which is much more manageable if you for example, like me, have, a full-time job and, you have to do all kinds of stuff, putting 10 days aside of work is really hard for me. But 24 hours, you can do it in a weekend, or you can take, a Friday off and you can go and do it, and that's probably fine. The CPTS, however, is much cheaper. Again, it's harder to kind of learn the material. It's less kind of easy to learn, but you learn far more, and they are far more focused on just realism, giving you hands-on pen testing, trying to essentially make it as real as possible. You get 10 days. It's much more challenging. There's far more information in their modules, but in the end, if you're really, really structured and you work really well, then you can overcome that and actually get your exam and get certified. Now, if you're going to try to pass any of these exams, here are my tips. What you want to do is to work really structured. You want to have good ways of taking notes of what you have done and what you're going to do next. So when you're doing your recon phase, you might see some FTP servers, you might see some websites, and what you should do is write down what are you going to do when you see that. And then once you've written everything down, then you start going down your list. Working structured like that and writing down what you've tried, if it succeeded, if it failed, writing down what credentials you have found or what hashes you have found, and if you tried to crack them or not, will help you stay on track on both exams. These exams aren't necessarily technically difficult. What they are challenging you to do is to work structured and actually think creatively. So thinking, what am I looking at? What access do I have? What have I tried? What have I not tried? And being able to essentially exhaust every possibility of what you can do, and doing that structured is how you're going to pass that exam. It's not going to be for any fancy, super complex exploits or anything like that. It's going to be by working structured throughout and with a system. Now, in my conclusions, I think that the CPTS is probably the best gift to cybersecurity, especially the pen testing side, in a long time. The fact that students can get access to all the course material for $7 a month is crazy. And then you get all kinds of other course material as well, where you can do other certifications. And all you need to do, if you want to try to get certified, is to pay a little bit of money and try the exam. The OSCP, however, really fits a different niche. It is more for professionals who have limited amount of time, so they are teaching you far more kind of high quality learning. It's far more structured in the way it is done. There's a red thread that kind of runs through it, and everything is kind of at one place. But at the same time, they don't have as much depth as the CPTS, but of course, they are far more respected in the industry. If I were to not have wasted hundreds of hours, what I would, by doing both essentially, what I have wanted to do is I would have gone and taken my OSCP, because I already work as a pen tester and, I can get it paid by my job. But to be honest, the CPTS was the certification I started before I became a pen tester. And I believe it actually was a big reason that somebody took a shot on me and allowed me to join a pen testing team. And I would never have been able to just, dump almost $3,000 on something like an OSCP. So having the CPTS at an affordable price, which I could even get my employer to pay because, it was kind of security training for an engineer, was really great. So unless you have a corporate sponsor or you have a lot of money that just kind of burning a hole through your pocket, go and do the CPTS. Get access to the modules, go through them, write down what you have learned, what skills you have acquired, and try the exam. If you can pass the CPTS, I promise you can pass the OSCP. And all you then need to do is to hopefully prove yourself during a job interview that you know what you're doing. And if you pass the CPTS, you motherfucking know what you're doing.